All right, welcome back. So today we are covering Microsoft Project again, and we are going to start to put a bow on our schedule. So, couple key things to talk through today on how to wrap up and publish a schedule. So what we've got now is we've got a pretty well built schedule here. We've got all our items listed out here. We've got pre-construction, we've got construction, we've got some sub tasks, sub WBS, and we've got our activities here. You'll notice though, what we want to start to do is figure out how we are going to print this thing and make it a good visual communication tool. So up here we have our timeline tool. We're going to want to right click that, and we're going to want to make our timeline something that makes sense. So right now we've got our top tier is not in use. Our middle tier and bottom tier are currently in use, which what that's referring to is if you look at this right here, you'll see up here where it says October, and then down here it shows days. Um, Top tier would add another line above that. So middle tier, we're going to change to quarters, and bottom tier, we're going to change to months. What that does is that allows you to rescale this thing back so you can see a little bit more of the whole project of what's going on here. You can also just use one tier if you want to use months as well. So now this allows us to see a lot more of the project clearly on here, which when we go to print it, will make a lot more sense. One thing that we have to do when we are putting together a project schedule as well is we have to understand where the critical path of the project is. So our critical path is the longest task from the very beginning of the project all the way down to the end. So in order to see the critical path in project, it's rather easy to get to. You just simply right click over on the grid right here, show hide bar styles, and then critical task. What that does is that turns your critical path red. So now your critical path is the longest chain of activities in order for the project to become finished. So you'll see right here, some of our activities aren't critical because they're not on the critical path. So bidding procurement is currently not shown as critical because it's not connected to anything on the end there. So our activity right here, this one doesn't have a open end to it. So there's nothing showing that it's attached to. So that tells us we need to potentially tie that to something. But as we get further down in here as well, install fencing is not critical. It's showing that our structural path is. So understanding your critical path is really important to figuring out what is actually critical in this project and what we have to do to print it. Next thing you want to do is you want to try and make these things be in somewhat of logical order. As you go and enter activities, you'll notice that sometimes that you may have forgot to put something in there. As you start linking activities, they get out of order. Quick thing you want to do, sort by start date, earliest to latest. Always puts these in a really nice order to easily see what has to happen when, all the way from the start to the end of the project. I found it's one of the easiest ways to visualize it. Sometimes you can do finish, start to end too. Another good way to do it because that'll tell you what needs to start to finish first, before what necessarily has to finish last. You have a lot of options there. There's not necessarily one that's right or wrong, but it's important to double check that as well. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about is tasks with open ends to them. So, as I talked about, our task right here, select trade partners, was currently shown as open-ended, which means it didn't have a successor to it. I know that because it doesn't have a little arrow coming off of it here, but we can also add our successor column as well here. So we'll go to insert column, scroll on down to successors. You'll see right here that that one is blank. So that has nothing following it. So logically, in order to probably start doing demo and start foundations, we need to have a trade partner selected, right? So we would say perhaps item 21 is a successor to this, as well as item 22. So now those are linked to the end. And what we can see now is that that actually is what became critical, to the project, and permitting came off the critical path of it. So you'll see as you infill activities and you find open-ended activities that the critical path may move based on that. That's why it's so important that as a rule for all of you, in my class, that when you are creating your activities, every single activity has to have a predecessor and a successor. Eventually, you guys will go on your careers and you'll find that some of you will use Primavera, and there's a report on it that looks for open ends, and you should have a you should have exactly one open end on each end of it. So because your first activity won't have a predecessor and your final activity won't have a successor, but every single activity in the middle should have a predecessor successor. As we go through the class, that's what I'm going to be looking for to try and make sure that everything is linked through. Because if you have something that doesn't have logic on the end of it, it's just considered an open end. All right, so now we've got a construction schedule. We figured out how to put a critical path to it. Now it's time to print this thing and try and get it to see if we like it. So you go up to File, Print. Relatively easy to understand here. But you'll notice the default view, it says there's 1 of 4 pages here. So if we click over, you'll notice that it's showing all the activities here, then all the Gantt chart here. And instead of going through and showing it all on one page, it's showing it across multiple pages here. It's generally not the best way to look at a schedule here. So what we want to try to do is get this thing to be on one page wide by any amount of pages tall. So we do that by going to page setup and then go to fit to one page wide by one page tall. If it's not tall enough, if there's not enough activities to it, it'll automatically push it to multiple pages. Sometimes you can kind of cheat it by going saying, let's go page setup again and go one page wide by 2 page tall if you want it to be a little wider. The unfortunate reality is you got to kind of click through these and experiment with them a little bit. But what you don't want to do is have all the activities spread out across 50 pages to the right because it's not really practical to look at. When you go to print as well, whatever columns you have in the view right here are going to be what prints. So like, let's say for instance, we got the predecessor, successors, and resource names column here. We don't really need those on a printout sheet. We just want to communicate the duration, start, and finish dates. So if we were to take these columns and go to hide column, and then go back to file and print again, you'll notice those columns are gone now. It becomes a little bit easier to read and less stretched out. So we're going to go take a stab at printing this one here. So we'll go File, Microsoft Print to PDF, and we'll hit Print. We'll save it on our local disk C. We'll call it my Raj Nick Lawson. Save. So it's printing. Now, when I go to open that up, probably a little bit outside the recording area, but we have my PDF of my schedule right here. So for all these students in the class, this is more or less what I'll be expecting out of you guys to produce for your projects going forward. One wide, it can be as many pages long as it needs to, but we don't want to have as activities across like 15 different pages because as your projects get longer, you may need to adjust the time scale up here, whatever you need to do. But yeah, so anyway, that's how to use my project to update it and to fix some of the settings to be able to produce a final construction schedule.